The media is so pervasive and so influential that when it portrays different gender stereotypes and portrays male and females differently, it entrenches gender stereotypes that rob us of our very own individual identities. And what are these media portrayals that we are talking about today in our debate? There are two main types. Firstly, there is a clear difference between men and women. That men are portrayed as all strong and masculine, but women then, on the other hand, are being portrayed as the weaker gender, the inferior gender, who is always dependent on the man for every need. And secondly, that these stereotypes are based on traditional gender roles within society. And this means that in today's debate, we're not talking about cases whereby males are portrayed in feminine ways, or females are portrayed in very tomboyish or masculine manners. And therefore, these ultimately accord to traditional gender roles within society. Our criteria for regrets is that this has been significant negative impact on A, gender equality, and B, people's perceptions of themselves within society. And we think this is ultimately harmful to society and individuals at large. And as the media veers towards sexism and increasing degrees of sexism, then the more side proposition regrets this and opposes this. What sort of indicators are we going to use to ensure that these are really portraying
points of information, madam?
No, thank you, sir. We think that there are really current indicators within society, such as the test of sexism used by the feminist movement, which measures movies and looks at criteria. For example, whether or not two women engaging in a conversation have a conversation which doesn't revolve around men.
Madam.
And out of a study done, no, thank you, sir. Out of 10 Oscars, only 2 in fact fulfill this criteria. And this clearly reflects a problem within society that these are gender stereotypes too deeply entrenched within our society. Side proposition will bring to you 2 main points of substantives. I, as the first speaker, will show you how this has huge negative impacts on society, while my second speaker, Edward, will then show you that this stifles artistic creativity. So now I'm going to move on to my substantive, that there are huge negative impacts on society. No, thank you, sir. First of all, we have to understand the nature of the media. That the media often has an incentive to exaggerate and clearly distinguish gender stereotypes and gender roles within society. Why is this so? Because the media is ultimately controlled by large corporations and large companies who are accountable to shareholders. And therefore, they are very concerned about their profit margin. They want to eliminate the risk involved in producing a movie, and they are profit motivated. And therefore, the choice for the media is that they often take the safe option. And in this case, the safe option is to reflect traditional gender stereotypes.
Sir,
why is this so? No, thank you, sir. We think that this is because society today and viewers ultimately subconsciously hold certain stereotypes about women and men. That ultimately, if you look at society, the bosses of the largest companies within the world seem to all be men. Then when you think of house spouses, you naturally think of housewives rather than house husbands. No, thank you, sir. So there's an ingrained stereotype within society that the women are often the ones who stay at home and look after the kids, and the women are often inferior to men. And therefore, when these stereotypes within the media are broken by the media, society often finds them very weird and very unusual. We give you an example of the advertisement by Abercrombie & Fitch, which shows the man's penis through his underwear. And this clearly panders to traditional stereotypes of male masculinity, which then is hopefully trying to appeal to the man's sense of masculinity, that if he buys this underwear, then he'll be like masculine. And you compare the situation if the advertisement portrays men who is very big. Like, do you really think that any man is then going to walk in the shop and buy the same piece of underwear that is after all the same quality and the same type, just advertised in a different manner? And therefore, ultimately, within society, in today's society, we are often trapped by these gender stereotypes. Yes, sir.
Differences don't necessarily need to be values-laden. The media likes to reverse these roles as well and cash in on that. We think sometimes that's good.
So we don't think this is the case within our media. We think that firstly, if the media really does portray men as not being as masculine and women as not being as feminine, we think that's great. But ultimately, in today's debate, we are saying that we regret cases whereby male and females are clearly delineated, there's clear roles within society, and there's clear discrimination and clear gender stereotypes within the media. So moving on. Therefore, we think that even though there may be differing views or differing media within society, ultimately these don't attract as much attention, and the mass media often only reflect the views of society. So these messages and these portrayals of gender stereotypes are then internalized within society. Why so? We'll give you 3 reasons. First of all, the media is pervasive, which means that it is everywhere we go. On every billboard we see when we walk out on the streets, on every television advertisement we watch, when we turn on the television, and on every video program we hear. No, thank you, sir. There is the sense of gender stereotypes and how men are always the more masculine one as compared to the females. And therefore, because entertainment is such a big part of our lives, that fundamentally the media has now been able to permeate into our lives and been able to tell us about all these values which we supposedly should have within our lives. Secondly, the media is often also very insidious. The media is able to play with your mind, such as by portraying and presenting stereotypes in very natural context. We give you the analogy of a movie whereby all the secretaries are played by female actresses. And even though this doesn't necessarily scream out at you, so thank you, sir, that all secretaries have been female wearing short skirts and high heels, ultimately we subconsciously come to accept this to be the norm. Then when we see a man as a secretary, and it's not like a female in short skirt and high heels, so thank you, sir, we start thinking that this is kind of strange, it's unusual, and we reject the notion that is being shown to us. And therefore, and third of all, we think that the media often attempts to reflect society. And in fact, more than that, the media tries to tell us that the media reflects society. This results in people and viewers then thinking of accepting what the media says as what really happens in society. This results in majority of the society accepting these as norms within society. This is especially so for children, whereby the first no, thank you, sir. First contact they have with the world is often the media, whereby they watch television at home, at home. And therefore, this has two main impacts. First of all, it entrenches gender stereotypes within societies. This clearly delineates roles within society that males can only do certain things. So thank you, sir. Males are always the one going out to work, while females are always the one staying at home and taking care of the kids. This reduces the possibility of reforms. That when feminist movements come out and try to campaign for female rights, they are ultimately rejected because society implicitly and subconsciously, no thank you, sir, rejects this as being natural and rejects this as being being kind of weird for society to accept. And therefore, it becomes harder for both male and females alike to break out of these gender stereotypes which the media has imposed on us. The second impact is that this is also very bad, negative for individual identity. That now the perception that I myself hold is that in order to be an attractive woman and for loads of guys like me, I must be really pretty and I must dress really well. I must wear high heels and have short skirts in order for males to like me. And we don't think this is something that we want to have, want individuals to have within society, because ultimately everyone is free to shape and mold their own identity. That if they don't necessarily want to go out and wear high heels and or for men be all buff and everything, then we don't think that they should be forced to do so because of these societal stereotypes. Ultimately, the media influences everyone, but it only reflects what the majority of society thinks. We think this is ultimately harmful for both society and for the individual alike. I'm very proud to propose.
Right, great. Because side proposition failed to present a yardstick by which we measure today's debate, side opposition is going to present one. The yardstick for today's debate is which side best balances societal perceptions of different genders. And through the entire, down the line inside the opposition, we prove one baseline, that we celebrate the differences by recognizing it. And we'll be proving this through 3 lines of analysis. As the first speaker, I'll be talking about creating an appreciation of diversity, and I'll also be proving how this practically empowers people through differences. My second speaker, Rabin, will then be talking to you about how it involves the sexual dialectic. But first of all, I'm going to be dealing with their case through first recontextualizing what this debate should really be about, and then dealing with their single practical points on the negative impacts of society. First of all, in their first speaker, they recognized that there was a spectrum. They said on one hand, you have the extremes of male masculine models in Abercrombie and Fitch, as the first speaker liked to point out, and pretty dainty women. However, they failed to recognize the other spectrum, the other end of the spectrum. So, thank you, sir. The examples such as Lama Croft, people who are celebrated for their femininity and differentiated because they're women, but yet at the same time are shown to be able to express gender roles of the males in terms of being masculine. In fact, this was what Joshua pointed out in his point of information about how, in fact, this is what the companies, their profit incentivized, as they pointed out, are seeking to do. Things that are sensational, things that challenge gender stereotypes, while still differentiating between the different gender roles. But moreover, we think that they need to have a much more aggressive, they need to fulfill their burden in a much more aggressive sense. The wording of the motion means that they need to regret, and this denotes that there must be a sense that something else must have been done which they wish the media or society had done. We think that this is the onus that the second speaker will therefore have to prove. I'm going to be moving on then to the point of contention with regards to the practical negative impacts, which is what the first speaker talked about. First of all, they said that stereotypes are most likely to be propagated because profit-incentivized media companies will likely present the most outrageous, offensive material. Is this really the case? Is this really the stereotypes that exist in society today, where feminist movements are the very reason we're here today debating for the rights of women? Is it really the case that profit-incentivized companies who know that if they present outrageous material on how women are to be kept at home, to be domestic housewives, is this really the kind of profit-incentivized characterization which they first presented to us? But moreover, they claimed firstly that media responds to the bias of society, then after that talked about this profit-incentivized relation, which shows that media responds to stakeholders, and then after that presented another perception of how the society is therefore influenced by the media. We think that they don't really know which influences which. There are contradictions throughout the entire first speech. But moreover, even if we were to take the consideration that there are stereotypes, we ask you, why is this really a bad thing? Stereotypes are the very reason why there are such massive feminist movements today. They're the catalyst and the foundation for many of these movements. We think that they're a rallying point for society to see what is wrong and therefore move on. They need to prove to us why this is something to be regretted. And finally, they talked about how we're indoctrinated by everything that we see. Is this really the case? I walk by the Abercrombie and Fitch model every day. I have no intentions of being like him. Is this really true? Is this really the point? In fact, media is often the basis for critical discourse. This is what I talked about with regards to feminist movements. This is why debate is often the central part of media. The media brings about critical discourse. Sir? We don't think people who see the media will definitely become immediately indoctrinated by everything they see. Their second speaker needs to pick up on this. I'm going to be transiting onto my point of substantive now, which is on creating an appreciation of diversity. And the thesis for this point is that by portraying differences, diversity is therefore appreciated by society. Why is this the case? This is because through different portrayals of women or men in the media, clear differences are portrayed. We recognize that these differences are inherently a good thing because they therefore present the unique perceptions of each individual. We see, for instance, the unique ability of women to bring about the wonders of new life, new childbirth, are something that is inherently different from what men are able to do. We think that in a world where they refuse to recognize these differences, they therefore reject any form of diversity. But moreover, sometimes even less tangible differences that are based on media's perceptions, which is kind of what they talked about in Stereotypes are presented. But this is exactly what media is about. Media is about the sheer mass of ideas that are made available to all individuals in society and therefore creating a diversity of views. Why is this diversity of views a good thing? This is because then society becomes more mature. Society recognizes that not one gender is more important than the other, but they're both special in their own ways. This recognition that males are different from females, however, males are not better than females. This is the diversity and maturity the side proposition has failed to be able to recognize. I'm going to be transiting on, I'll take you in a minute, sir. I'm going to be transiting on to my second point of substantive now, which is on why this, therefore, empowers women. But before I move on, yes, sir.
Prove to us that the media of the past 30 years has been as differentiated, as variable as you claim.
Well, let's just look at this year alone. On one hand, you've got Big Bang Theory, which produces images of Penny, the stereotype women you talk about. But in the same TV show, you've got Amy Farrah Fowler, the PhD woman who's smart, educated, sophisticated. And then on the other hand, you have other instances of TV around the world where you have perceptions of women who are sophisticated, perceptions of women who are smart, and yet at the same time, women who enjoy their ability to procreate, the unique ability, the unique individuality of their identity as females. This is the kind of differentiation that they refuse to talk about, they refuse to acknowledge. My second point of substantive, the thesis of this, is that different portrayals therefore allow an acceptance of different objective perceptions of success. The logic for this is that it roots very fundamentally in what is wrong with the common monolithic perception which we assume side opposition is propagating. What is wrong with this? This means that only one perception of success is permissible. That means that women who are successful are defined by women who succeed in the boardroom, women who wear power suits, women who earn high income. This is why statistics such as how only 5% of CEOs in Fortune 500 companies are seen as a bad thing. This is because women are not seen to succeed in their world because there's only a single monolithic perception of what success is. But why is this such a bad thing? But first of all, what examples of this in the media? We see in the recent instances of the movie of Iron Lady, where Margaret Thatcher was celebrated by being a masculine person who had succeeded because she was masculine, and this is the monolithic perception of success. We see this in Mona Lisa's Smile, the opposite, which is a case example which is beneficial to our side, how liberated women who undergone university education celebrate their ability to work as housewives and get in touch with that perception of success. This is really what self-actualization means. The self-actualization where an individual can perceive what is good for them, what is their perception of success. Only through a differentiation in media where different portrayals of men and women are allowed, this is when individuals in society therefore come to accept that different perceptions of success are permissible and therefore accept these different women as successful, or men for that matter. So what have I shown you today? Side opposition has shown you why side proposition has failed to meet their onus of truly regretting the change, regretting and failing to understand the change which they hope to achieve. We've also shown to you how side opposition has instead proven to you why principally it's a good thing that diversity takes place in the media, and we've also shown to you the practical benefits of acceptance and true meaning of success we're proud to oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, their case is built on bad logic, like saying that bad media portrayals of women and men alike are good reasons, because feminist movements will then be created to strike them down. This is akin to saying like crime is good because it allows for the existence of the justice system to crack down on it. So ladies and gentlemen, two main points of contention for today. First of all, let me use the notion that they challenge us to come up with an alternative. Let me use that notion of coming up with that very alternative to deal with several points on the other side of the house. Second of all, I'm going to be dealing with this entire notion of whether media has truly been differentiated, like whether media of the past 30 years has truly been differentiated and varied as they claim. Last of all, I'll be doing this entire notion of the monolithic theory of success that media helps to dispel on their side of the house. So first of all, what is our alternative? Now, firstly, I would like to clarify that I don't see why a regret motion requires an alternative, because the alternative is obvious. What we regret is the fact that there are specific media portrayals of women and men in specific roles that are differentiated in society for the past 30 years. So in other words, the alternative is a media that didn't do something like that. And we believe a media that didn't do something like that would be different in other ways as well. For instance, it would not only not focus on gender, but we think that this necessarily translates into they're not going to be racist, they're not going to place black men to be all the drug smugglers and drug crime lords and so on and so on. But also we think that such a media will be far more differentiated and varied, precisely what their side is pushing for. I will be proving to you in my second main point of contention that the media, thanks to their paradigm, has not at all been differentiated. So ladies and gentlemen, now that I've dealt with my opening, this notion of feminist group rallying around this notion, rallying around this unfair portrayals in media, let's talk about the second point under this, where they claim the media encourages discourse. Not only was this a throwaway line, but it didn't elaborate at all, right? Why does the media encourage discourse? Joanne spent her entire substantive, on the other hand, proving to you the contrary. The media doesn't encourage discourse because there's so often hardly anything new. And by the fact that we self-affirm and self-congratulate society, we give society precisely what they want to hear and want to know. So thank you, sir. It's for these very reasons that the media does not encourage discourse. So we challenge their second speaker to come back and elaborate on this point.
Points of information,
second point of contention. No, thank you, sir. Has media been differentiated? Now, they give us very interesting examples. They give us Lara Croft, which is ironically the largest sex symbol for action gamers, right? She's shoving her ass in her face every time she's trying to fire a gun. That's all. Ladies and gentlemen, media has not been differentiated. In cases where they so-called break stereotypes, we still think that media tries to play safe. That's why Lara Croft still shows her ass in your face, despite the fact that she's now an action character in a game. We think that media ultimately wants to play safe and therefore keeps sexualizing and emphasizing the differences between men and women. Even if women change, what Lara Croft does demonstrate is that women don't change all that much. That ultimately they're still about sex objects. So no, ladies and gentlemen, the media has not been differentiated there. But the second reason why media has not been been differentiated is because we look at the power structures of our economy. We recognize that the media is largely run by oligopolies, right? Regardless of whether it's movies, regardless of whether it's newspapers, or regardless of whether it's like TV shows, we think that all of these are largely run by a few companies, be it like Fox Broadcasting Entertainment, or like Hollywood, Universal Studios, and so on and so forth, New York Times, Washington Times, etc. Only large companies can afford to compete in the world of the media by virtue of the way of the economy. And therefore the media has not been differentiated simply because mainstream views are the best way to sell. And Royan has proved that to you, right? We talked about how mainstream views have been perpetuated to society precisely because of the shareholder incentive. Hence, media had no incentive to differentiate itself from its contemporaries in the past because all society wanted was to be fed its very own ideals that it propagated. So last thing about convention, this entire notion of a monolithic portrayal of success. But what our side stands for is that success is about doing what you want. Success is about capability to do what you want and succeed at it. What our side stands for is for people, not in just media, but therefore in real life, for people to do as they want and therefore to succeed. We don't think there should be some overarching portrayal of men and women, regardless of whatever extreme I'm talking about. Whether or not it's women working in the office or women becoming the CEO. We think that ultimately the monolithic portrayal of success is further encouraged on their side, right? Because when you consider the other end of the spectrum, when you consider the other end of the spectrum, that shows that success is like that for the woman and she has to look like that. She has to look like Lara Croft. So thank you, sir. And therefore we think the monolithic portrayal of success is not evident on our side of the case, simply because because under our alternative, the media is allowed to portray women and men however they want. So now let me move on to my primary substantive of today, of how I talk about the limiting of artistic expression and critical thought, as well as its damage on society, which we thoroughly regret.
Points of information.
Before that, yes, sir.
So prove to us why a portrayal of a housewife as a happy individual is inherently a bad thing in your case.
Why is a portrayal of a housewife a bad thing in our case? Now, we don't think it's a single instance of a portrayal of a happy housewife. We think women can become housewives if they want. The real question here is, what is the true undercurrent that runs through all of media that we see to be true? It's not the single portrayal of a housewife. It's the repeated portrayal of a housewife time and time again throughout all forms of the media, which is the real problem. We have no problem with men being shown to be gay barbers or men being shown to be CEOs. But what if the media didn't differentiate, didn't vary, and continued to portray men and women in the exact same roles without changing anything? That's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. We think the media needs to be varied, and we will not regret that sort of variety. We do regret, what we do regret is this sense of constancy that men and women have to subscribe to something like that. If they can somehow prove that Lara Croft is not an example of conforming to this differentiation between men and women, then we will accept Lara Croft, because clearly this motion calls for us to regret only specific media portrayals of the differences between men and women. So thank you, sir. So let me move back to my substantive. The thesis of which is that when the media resorts to stereotypes, this inherently limits artistic expression and critical thinking. So we need to go back to ask ourselves, how is media usually produced? We think that huge companies with huge budgets task script writers and directors to do their thing. But the problem is that the aim is always the same. The aim being that of the profit motive. The shareholder accountability has to be accounted for. Otherwise, they get fired by these very shareholders sitting on the board of directors. We think that huge amounts of money are at stake here. And therefore, the logical thing to do is that directors are made to think about what will sell for sure. We think that this results in self-censorship amongst directors, right? You self-censor something that may potentially be a flop, something that may potentially be incendiary, or something that simply won't earn as much as what its predecessors have shown through inductive reasoning. Whether or not this is true, whether or not self-censoring, whether or not it flops or not, is out of the question. The point is that these directors self-censor. So thank you, sir. This results in tried and tested formulas, such as the action movie James Bond being the ultimate trope, carrying so many ultimate tropes of the action movie genre. There's a strong and silent male, he goes on a perilous journey, he sleeps with a gullible, beautiful woman for her own sake, and eventually wins. You know, that sort of thing that happens, and despite the fact society swallows it up, because as long as we tweak the plot a little bit, change the characters that interact here and there, we can have things like Iron Man, the Bond trilogy, and Mission Impossible, which are all essentially spin-offs of the same thing. So this proves that the formula from that Hollywood uses, for instance, is a method that works, and it's a method that works consistently regardless of what society wants. So we think that freedom of expression is curtailed here on the part of the director, and we think that one should never ever be curtailed by money. One should never ever lose your ability to express yourself artistically just because society would disapprove of it. So here's where I'm going to prove something else. Why does the media have a duty to tell society what it doesn't necessarily want to hear? Two reasons. First of all, because not everyone wants to watch the same old things over and over again, right? Our baseline of our site clearly states that what the media does currently is to reflect the majority while affecting everyone. It drowns out opposing views, resulting in an echo chamber of self-affirmation and self-congratulation. That's wrong. The second reason why it's wrong is because we have a duty to promote discourse. Because when the Guardian wins awards for investigative journalism that promotes alternative views, the media has a unique position to see what mainstream society can't. Diverse media gives us alternatives, and that's what our site stands for and never regrets.
When they tell us that we're more clumsy. But let's begin with this debate proper. I have three main points of rebuttal. First of all, I'm going to ask their side what they really want. Second of all, I'm going to ask, are differences good? And third of all, I'm going to ask, how pervasive is the media? Actually, I'm going to look at that first. Let's look at what they want. They told us that homogenization is bad, but at the same time, they don't want difference. They haven't made it clear to us what they want the media to portray. Do they want them to portray a monolithic conception of femininity? Do they want the media to portray that all women should be like men? Or do they want the women, or do they want the media to show what it does now? They haven't really explicated that to us. But more than that, how will they achieve their policy goals? They haven't shown us how they're going to force the media to tell society what it doesn't want to hear, as they've laid out in their first speaker. We believe that this debate should be about the motive of the feminine figure in literature and how it should be portrayed, but if they want to fight us on policy, so be it. Now let's look at the second area of contention in this debate. How pervasive is the media? They told us that the media and the moguls who control the media, no thank you madam, dominate the minds of every single individual in society. We say that this isn't true. How the media responds is determined to a very great extent by society, because the media is a complex organization. Let's look at how the media works. We accept that moguls in the media, people in Fox, people in The Times, pander to what the masses want by thank you madam, portraying it in television, portraying it in the newspapers, and therefore influence what they believe in. But at the same time, the masses also dictate what sort of things are portrayed in the media, because they don't accept every single thing which is told them in the media. There's a certain point when they'll say, we cannot stand this, no thank you, because it goes against our societal values. It goes against the values we once held, but now don't hold anymore because our ideas have changed. And how does the ideas of the masses change? It changes when bold men and women, like the ones sitting here in this room, the ones who have made this tournament a success, stand up and point out to people the fact that gender norms and stereotypes must change. So we say the public really isn't dominated by the media like they've tried to lie to you about. Let's move on to the third area of clash. Thank you. Is difference good? Is artistic expression prohibited? Let's first look at artistic expression. They told us that self-censorship will result when the media always portrays the difference in gender roles, because artists feel a pressure to conform to the norms of society. But what they forget, that this also happens under their hypothetical model, where they want the media to show a portrayal of men and women as fundamentally the same. Artists are going to conform to this idea because they know that's what the studios will buy. No, thank you, madam, under their model, and so they don't really solve anything. But more than that, no matter what the views of society are, no matter what sort of portrayal of women society has liked throughout the times, there have always been alternate conceptions. Yes, we have James Bond today, but we also have films like Juno, we also have films like Black Swan, which show a different side of women and a different aspect of how they interact with society. And then they told us, in the main core of their logic, that differences always mean subjection. Differences always mean inferiority. Well, thank you, sir. We say that this isn't the case. Femininity doesn't mean that a woman is inherently subjected. It just means that she realizes she is different, that is part of her individuality, and she chooses to act according to female norms. That is how much of media portrays these women today. No, thank you, because these women still achieve success. They still achieve respect. Lara Croft isn't a servant to men. Yes, she's proud of her sexuality. She exhibits it, she showed it off. But she still defeats men in every single Tomb Raider game she plays, and that's a sign that women aren't afraid to be themselves. And our media portrayals of women are media portrayals of women which are negative and which equate difference with inferiority good. We say that sometimes they are because they reflect what society thinks about women and allow society to come to terms and reject old irrational ideas. It isn't the same as crime, and I'm going to clash with this in my substantive later. Let's look at my substantive, which talks about the the constantly evolving gender dialectic. The thesis of this argument is that an accurate portrayal of the difference between men and women of the times exposes sexual attitudes towards gender, and this paves the way for new ideas and empowerment of women. Our aim is for society to be able to openly discuss the attitudes held by men towards women, and vice versa. And the premise of my argument is that media is a reflection of social prejudices, is a reflection of social attitudes. Whether these be positive, whether these be negative, no thank you, and these attitudes arise from either positive or negative perceptions of the differences between men and women. But prejudices always exist, as I'm sure everyone in this room can accept. Men are always called clumsy brutes, and women are often said that they should be denigrated to the kitchen. But what happens when you have a homogeneous portrayal of women by the media is that this portrayal is necessarily artificial, something they've already conceded in their previous speech. It isn't reflective of social beliefs and norms. We give the example of communist propaganda from the Stalinist era. Hold on a minute, sir, which portrayed men and women as fundamentally the same, workers who must work to the glory of a greater state. Go ahead.
What we push for is not homogeneity. What we push for is that there should be no social norm in the media as to what men and women do.
Sir, we say that the absence of a social norm necessarily implies that the media will portray the difference between men and women because they are different. But we don't think they should always portray these differences either. We say that yes, they can emphasize these differences, but they can also point out exceptions to the norm. People who choose to defy their biological inclinations and the stereotypes which society has placed upon them. No thank you. No thank you, madam. We gave the example of Amy Farrah Fowler. Yes, society may think that women should always be in the kitchen, that women should always be subjected to men. But she has a PhD in neuroscience and she has achieved success. And then there's Penny. She conforms to traditional stereotypes of what a woman should be. But she has achieved success in a different way because she's still respected by all the men around her. Moving on with my substantive. Homogeneous portrayals of society by the media are not good things. Why are they bad? They're bad because it means that society cannot see itself. It means that there's a lack of discussion, a lack of evaluation of norms by the collective social consciousness of the attitudes that every single individual holds. No, thank you, sir. But what do we believe is good? We believe that a media which freely emphasizes whatever difference it sees between men and women, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, is good because this reflects societal views. Societal attitudes towards the relation between men and women are exposed. This promotes discussion and allows the arrival of new ideas to counter and refine the social conception of the ideal woman and the ideal man. How? In history, we've seen that feminism has always expressed moral outrage at ideas in media which they believe to be fundamentally against their values, and vice versa. New ideas have come up and rejected the irrationality of old ideas which equated good difference with bad inferiority. Just look at the films from the post-World War II era, which said that a hard-working woman is a cuter woman, a phrase which is obviously patristic, which we can't accept. This gave rise to a new generation of leaders in 1950s and 1960s feminism who had grown up watching these sorts of things, like Carol Churchill, and who said, no, we're not going to accept this anymore. Even Iron Lady, the recent portrayal of Margaret Thatcher, showed that society still views women as internally weak, even if they are externally strong, and allowed ideas which rebutted this perception and equation of difference with inferiority to come into the open. It's very good for ideas to clash because this shapes the cultural paradigm which we today think about women and men, and that's very good because every generation must reject ideas which impede it from progressing and which define it.
Their side stance is confused because on the one hand they tell us that we want women portrayed as happy housewives. On the other hand they tell us that we want women to break out their traditional gender stereotypes. So what on earth do they want on their side of the house? We don't get what they want on their side of the house. We don't get whether they want women to be, whether they continuously want the difference in the stereotypes to be exaggerated and emphasized, or whether they want the differences to constantly evolve and to constantly invent new differences for men and women. But on our side of the house, our alternative is clear. We are not supporting some homogeneous, monolithic, communist characterization of both men and women. What we want is every man and woman to express themselves as diverse, independent individuals with their own identity. We don't want individuals pigeonholed into characterization of this is men and this is women, and since I'm a man, I must act like this, and since I'm a woman, I must act like this. We want the portrayal of both happy housewives and happy women CEOs. We want the portrayal of men that seem equally happy wearing pink underwear as they are happy wearing black underwear, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we celebrate diversity on our side of the house, because we don't believe that the media should portray, should prescribe a certain set of actions, ladies and gentlemen, for both men and women. We want the media to portray men and women equally happy with their own choices, regardless of whether society perceives these choices as traditionally masculine or feminine. And that's the alternative that our side wants. That's why we regret today's media, which characterizes men and women in particular ways. So 3 questions for the house today. Firstly, what messages does the media send us in the status quo? Secondly, what is the impact of media on society at large? And finally, this whole point on diversity. Which side better promotes diversity? First question we have to deal with is what message the media sends us. We've told you right from first speaker that the media sends us a homogeneous message. The media attempts to divide men and women along traditional lines of stereotype. And the analysis we've given you is that the media is risk averse. Because the large media companies don't want to spend huge amounts of capital on sensational projects that might eventually flop. No thank you. And because as shareholders are going to prejudice investments that are less risky, we tell the media is going to stick to the script, the media is going to stick to the formula. Their response to this is that the media has an incentive to be sensational. Exactly, ladies and gentlemen. They're sensational in all the wrong ways. They're sensational in the fact that the Sun sees it fit to put a naked woman on page 3 of his newspaper. And for that reason, when they sensationalize gender stereotypes in this way, we think it's ultimately worse for the gender movement as a whole. Ultimately, women are seen as good only for their breasts, ladies and gentlemen. But even if you accept this sensationalism may be a good thing, we say that society will reject this as sensational. That's why we're applying the label sensational and controversial to these things in the first place. And it's this sensational things that make society create a backlash against a feminist movement. That makes society view feminist movements like bra burners in a bad light for the simple reason that they're too sensational, too controversial, and for this reason, the mainstream society is likely to reject, in fact, these sensational views portrayed in the media. But the second thing they came out and told us was that the media nowadays tries to blur gender lines. Now the media tries to blur gender lines, and that's really a good thing on our side of the house, and we don't regret that on our side of the house. If Lara Croft really, if we believe them, if it is really the epitome of a woman trying to break free of traditional gender stereotypes, then yes, we celebrate this because that's a really, really good thing, that Lara Croft is not sticking to traditional gender stereotypes, that the difference in Lara Croft being a woman is not emphasized as that being different from a man. But we say that on the contrary, no thank you, even if the gender line is blurred, they went down with Edwards' analysis, that even if the media portrays women in different light, no thank you, or portrays genders in a fundamentally different light, the fundamentals don't change. All these women are still portrayed as sex objects. That's something that they went down, that's something they need to deal with. Finally, let's deal with Rabin's substantive about how conceptions of women have evolved over time. Well, yes, that's true, but that doesn't change the fact that women today still to fit stereotypes of what a modern woman should be like. The modern woman, ladies and gentlemen, now, yes, it might be true that a modern woman can go to the office instead of staying at home and just be a housewife. But even in the office, ladies and gentlemen, the modern woman can't be too bitchy. The modern woman can only be a secretary. And yes, we are saying that even though stereotypes of women have evolved over time, these stereotypes remain stereotypes, and we shouldn't continue to pigeon women into any stereotype whatsoever, regardless of whether that stereotype is modern or traditional, whether that stereotype has evolved. So we say that at the end of the day, the message that media sends us is one of stereotypes, of one that men and women are fundamentally different for these reasons, and we need to stick to that script and change their first speaker to do that. Let's move on to the whole idea of the impact on society, which is my second form of contention. They say that their policy promotes moral outrage and a rallying point for the feminist movement as a whole. We say that feminist movement already has many rallying points. The fact that there aren't enough female CEOs, for instance, is already a rallying point for women. We don't need the media to further exemplify this because people can see it for themselves in society. No thank you. But furthermore, we say that the masses don't even realize that the media is portraying women in a stereotypical light or portraying men in a stereotypical light. What my first speaker told you was that the media is insidious. People don't realize it. People don't realize it when Lara Croft is sticking an ass out in her face because we think that that's normal. And the fact that this happens in every single video game involving women or every single movie involving women makes it even more normalized within our heads that women should be like that. And therefore, we don't feel that same kind of moral outrage which we ordinarily would feel. And that's the insidious character of the media. They take a majority view which is sexist and biased against different genders and imposes it upon every single person, thus cutting out the original diversity of views that we would have if we didn't have the media. In essence, the media reflects majority views but imposes these majority views on everyone because of its insidious power to affect everyone.
Differences are so much more than sexualizing the genders. Differences also include different ways different genders interact with society.
I'm going to deal with this in my final point of contention. So here, wait for it, and we'll talk about it. But back to my point on the impact society. The impact society is this, ladies and gentlemen, that alternative views are cut out. That if I originally hold alternative views about how women should be portrayed, how women should act in society, that view is drowned out because the media is so pervasive. And every time I walk out of the house, I'm told by the media that women should act like this, that men should act like this, and this destroys my original diverse views. This in fact affects children, ladies and gentlemen, the next generation of society. The only way we can change internalized gender stereotypes, and that's a part of Julian's substantive that no one on their side of the house has touched. So in essence, the media has a negative impact on society because it's so powerful, pervasive, and insidious. Finally, I'm going to talk about this entire idea of diversity. They say that our side presents a monolithic idea of how men and women should act. We say that's fundamentally not true. Our side of the house respects the right of every man and woman to act in a masculine or feminine way depending on their own preferences. And that's real diversity. We want every person to express themselves in their own way, in the way that they see fit, in the way that best reflects their own identity. What is their side doing when it doesn't? What is the media and the status quo doing? The media and status quo is prescribing a set means of success. And when their side of the house talks about how we must celebrate happy housewives, that's the very thing that's most insidious about media. Because we don't want the media to portray housewives as being happy and contented where they are. We don't want the media to say that housewives shouldn't go and fight for their own rights in the office. We don't want the media to say that you can be a housewife if you're a woman and you should be happy with it because that's where you belong, ladies and gentlemen. That's insidious and that ultimately harms society by suppressing the kind of diversity that we talk about. What about the entire idea of discourse? We say that because the media is so pervasive, because the major companies in the media are so pervasive, they drive alternative views out of business. They drive independent filmmakers out of business, and therefore we don't get the discourse that we want. In fact, the feminist movement are frowned upon as sensational and radical because of the mass media. Finally, they haven't dealt with Edward's entire substantive on promoting art, promoting the diversity and creativity that's so important to art as an institution that is in our media, and for that reason, go to the start of proposition.
We're debating with a side whose case is ultimately hung on the assertion that the media is the opiate of the masses. We're debating with a side whose entire case is hung on the idea that the media panders to some kind of stereotype which is in society and that society doesn't ever actively negotiate with the media and doesn't ever actively try and change what the media talks about. Really, because of the lack of a variety in analysis throughout the entire case, I'm afraid I only have 2 points of contention in today's debate. Firstly, on the nature of the media, and secondly, on how that relates and changes societal perceptions. So let's first talk about the nature of the media, and here's where there's been a fundamental flaw in their stance, where they say that differences equate to negative stereotypes that sexualize women, that portray women in parochial stereotypes, in misogynistic stereotypes, and nothing more than that. But from the very beginning, even before we stepped up to speak from our first QI, we told you that differences are greater than that. That differences do not equate only to stereotypes, that any kind of emphasis on differences is something which must be a part of this debate. And when we talked about that, and we told you that the media often moves beyond these kinds of traditional stereotypes, they said, we don't regret that, that's fine. So we think that in that itself, there has been a fundamental concession that the media has evolved, and that they see that there have been benefits of the evolution of the media in this way, and how that has changed perceptions within society. So basically on this idea of stereotypes, it completely falls. But we've shown you even in the idea of parochial and patriarchal stereotypes, there has been a benefit, because that's the only burden that they've put on our side throughout this debate, because they've failed to engage in the other areas which we've already taken. So fine, let's talk about stereotypes and the patriarchal ones from yesteryear. Now they've talked about how the media reflects traditional misogynistic views, and that's linked to the dominance of big companies, it's formulaic, it tells society what it wants. Basically that the media is a monolithic entity. Is it really, ladies and gentlemen? The media is evolving. It doesn't conform to one formula all the time. In fact, we think that the media loves to turn these stereotypes on their head in order to create controversy, in order to create provocative views which society therefore responds to. We think that that in itself creates an awareness of differences in terms of the stereotypes which are being perpetuated in society, and in terms of the difference between stereotypes of yesteryear and of today. In fact, we think that the media thrives on alternatives views. That's why we have got such a flourishing indie movie scene, a flourishing indie music scene. It's precisely because of the fact that society doesn't want one culture, but it always prefers countercultures. It always prefers diversity of views. It always prefers that kind of societal, ideological, dialectic, no thank you madam, which is what the media brings about, the media thrives on, and the media feeds. And it's precisely because of this discussion, precisely because of this tension of views, that even the stereotypical patriarchal views that they've had of women and they've had of genders have been exposed by the media and have created critical discussion. We think that that's something that they have failed to deal with up to this point because they still see the media as a monolithic entity, which it clearly isn't, which is precisely the reason why you can see talk show hosts like Rush Limbaugh making remarks about women which stereotype them, and people, the entire feminist movement, despite the fact that it's quite fragmented at this point, unifying itself together in condemnation of him. It's precisely because of that fact that he tries to pander to certain groups, society, and society itself compensates for that. That creates the kind of dialectic in society, the kind of discussion in society that allows it to move forward. Because it is precisely this kind of conflict of tension that allows outmoded ideas to be rejected by society and society to move on to newer, better ideas of gender relations. That's something that we need to deal with. No, thank you, sir. In fact, we think that even if this isn't the case, all we need to show you is that this type of media has led to an evolution of patriarchal views, which they have, and I'm going to talk about it now. Go ahead.
How can indie movies possibly compete with the big blockbuster media firms in terms of attention from the mainstream society?
So look at the Oscars, look at the Academy Awards. It isn't your big blockbusters like Transformers 3, which wasn't very good by the way, which are getting the Academy Awards. It's the ones which are examining social problems, dealing with them in ways which society didn't otherwise think of, and providing alternative perspectives. Those are the kind of media which are rewarded in society. Those are the kind of media which society appreciates because it leads to discourse, it leads to society moving on. No, thank you, sir. They've talked about social imbalance and how they stand for media with no stereotypes. But wait a minute, the media necessarily generalizes and brings things to extremity in order to present them, in order to reflect society, and in order to tell stories. So how they create this reflection is what the debate is all about. Whether the way that they've created this reflection is beneficial or not. And completely rejecting the way that the media displays things, generalizes things, presents narratives and creates narratives of society. In that sense, by rejecting that means they completely reject the media itself. Because they don't stand for a media that could ever relate to society. They don't stand for a media that could ever present ideals to society and reflect what societal realities are. So at the end of the day, we think that they've had too much of an idealistic view of what the media is. We think that we have seen a very realistic picture of what the media is and how that has actually brought about benefits, that has brought about evolution, that has brought about critical thinking, discourse. We've talked about how there have been two views of media, not just the patriarchal views, but views which have moved beyond those stereotypes which they haven't dealt with, and we've talked to you about how even the patriarchal views have allowed for unification, critical thinking, and discourse. Which brings me on to my second clash in today's debate, which is about how this discourse, how the media actually affects society and the interplay and the relationship there. They've talked about how the media constantly panders to underlying stereotypes in society, but we don't think this is the case. We've already told you why. In fact, we think that when they disavow any emphasis on differences, what they do create is that homogenization. Because what they do create is a lack of remark, no thank you sir, on the differences between men and women and the differences that they play in society. And because of that, there's no remarkability about when men and women move beyond these stereotypes, when men and women actually function in roles which are different. We think that that's bad, we think that that's subversive to the very idea of appreciating differences within society and actually creating that kind of social discourse. In fact, we think that society, up to this point in time, precisely because of the media, has been trained to be able to engage critically with it. We think that because of the media and social platforms, where society is the one which is actually contributing actively to this media, microblogging platforms like Twitter, social networks like Facebook, it is precisely because of these things that society has become engaged in the media and has actually caused the role of the media to evolve. We think that society's engagement with this media doesn't point to their idea about society being subjugated by it and the media becoming an opiate of the masses. What it points to is society being able to engage with this media on a higher order level, being able to push for advocacies of certain key rights and for certain key movements. We see this from the recent example of how Joseph Kony of the Lord's Revolutionary Army in Uganda has actually been coming to the forefront because of Facebook, and there's been social change and social movement towards change because of that and because of society's role in the social media. We think that that in itself shows how the idea that media completely subjugates, blankets society in one particular perspective doesn't stand, and how society has always engaged with the media. In fact, we think that precisely because of this fact, the media isn't monolithic, and the media does encourage that kind of social critical discourse. So at the end of today's debate, what we've really shown you is that today's debate is about how the media projects messages and how those messages have affected men and women's roles. It's not just about traditional stereotypes, it's about how the media portrays differences in society, portrays differences in narratives, and creates those narratives. We've shown you how on all counts, those narratives have led to discourse, have shown evolution, and have led to society being all the better for it.
It was a little difficult to see what they wanted by the end of this debate. Instead of two different worlds in this debate, we seem to have three separate worlds. One was the consistent world of side proposition, which said that difference is good, but so are individuals who choose to defy the norm. And finally, there was the conflicted world of their side, which said that they wanted a homogeneous, they said in their second speaker that they wanted homogenization of the female type in media. But then they came up in their third speaker and said they didn't really stand for anything at all, so long as it didn't portray difference. We asked them, what do you want? How do you achieve this? They never really gave us an answer, and their case didn't have very much constructive material because it was premised entirely on negative logic. But let's leave that aside. Let's look at the world of side proposition. They equated difference with inferiority, and so they wanted to homogenize women. At first, they stood of a type of women who fundamentally became like men. Women who had to become like men, reject their sexuality, and reject their individuality to achieve success in society. That was something we rejected because we said that that is bad. That creates a society, a media which has no color, which has no luster. And so that wasn't a very good thing. But most of their arguments were premised on the pervasiveness of the media. They told us that the media fundamentally indoctrinates society and dictates every single thing that society does. We asked them, really? Society is brave enough to stand against the currents of media moguls. Yes, media moguls pander to societal desires and so influence them. But society can say, time to stop. This is when we want change. This is why there are people like Carol Ann Duffy, which we pointed out to you, Sylvia Plath, Andrea Dawkins, all people who are brave enough to stand up to the currents of society, show them that their ideas were wrong, and therefore get society to change the things that the media portray. But we also evolved this argument. We told you that society always wants alternatives because alternatives create excitement. Alternatives create color, and society approves of alternatives. That's why very alternative films like The Black Swan get the Oscar Awards, get the Academy Awards, something which Josh pointed out to you. So we say the media really isn't that pervasive and doesn't entrench horrible, horrible stereotypes. Let's look then at our world and what we really wanted. This is a much clearer picture to paint. We said that difference doesn't equal to inferiority. We started out by showing you the power of difference. We showed you that there are some things women can do which are good and which men can't do. And there's some things which men can do which are good and women can't do. All of these and the different choices which men and women make aren't necessarily bad. We told you that women who are feminine and still get respect from men in the office, who still become the central figure of literary depictions of women, are very good. We told you that these differences say that women can still achieve success despite the fact that they're feminine. And we say that exceptions to what society wants are good as well. We gave the example of women who defied social norms, who rose above what society expected of them, and chose to do things a different way. That's fine with us too. But the second argument we gave you was this. We told you that it's always good for society, for the media to reflect what society truly wants, because what society implicitly holds, because this promotes critical discourse. We told you about the fact that even when the big media moguls pander to stereotypes in society and use stereotypes saying that women are inherently inferior in their depictions of women, this promotes critical discourse and we shouldn't stop it. Because the wonderful thing about liberty, the wonderful thing about our free market ideas is that this enables feminists, this enables people who think that the equation of difference with inferiority is bad to come up and say, we reject these ideas because they're based on outmoded cultural paradigms. So because our side stood for nuanced conception of difference, and our side told you that we truly can make change, go with side opposition.
I am a woman, and I think I speak for all the women in this lecture theatre when I say that it is outrageous and preposterous for side opposition to come up and tell us that there are certain things women can do and certain things men can do. And there's a line that can never be crossed, because fundamentally there are differences between men and women. And we think that this is exactly the kind of language they've been hearing from side opposition. There are certain fundamental differences that can never be crossed. That is good, they're happy housewives, because, then as we say, that is bad, because in fact, this entrenches the idea that women should all be housewives and be happy at that, and don't go out to work in society. And fundamentally, we think it's great if, women want to be housewives, if women want to wear high heels and wear short skirts. But ultimately, that isn't the principle this side proposition is standing for. We stand for the principle of choice, that if you want to defy social norms, you should be able to, without fearing backlash, without fearing that other people will look down on you and condemn you for not being as feminine as you should be, for not being as masculine as you should be. So I'm going to ask 3 questions in today's debate. First of all, who exactly is the media that we are discussing? Second, how influential is the mainstream media? And last of all, what are the impacts of the mainstream media permeating our lifestyle today? First question, who is the media we're discussing? It only became really clear in the third opposition speaker when he came up, that clearly today we're talking about there are 2 types of media. One is the mainstream media, whom side opposition has been focusing on throughout this entire debate, who reflects what society wants because they are concerned about the profit margin. And on the other side, they're talking about the counter-culture media, who doesn't want homogeneity, who wants diverse viewpoints. So first of all, we think that the counter-culture media doesn't exactly emphasize the differences, because their emphasis is on showing how women and men are able to cross the differences and how they're able to be women CEOs and house husbands. And therefore, this isn't really the kind of media portrayal that we're talking about in today's debate. What we are talking about are the mainstream media, whereby there are clear differences and men and women are shown as never being able to cross these differences. Secondly, how influential is the mainstream media? The first thing it told us was, society would challenge it. Therefore, it's great that the mainstream media shows these differences. Edward came out with his speech and told you that this is bad logic, because all you're saying is that it's good if you exaggerate these differences, and then therefore you're able to come and counter it. More than that, we also told you, in fact, that for my very first speech, that often these differences are emphasized in a very insidious manner. That is so insidious that you don't really realize that they're telling you this. Therefore, there isn't a proper and tangible manner they are able to counter it and come out and point at it and say that this is the wrong value that we want society to be living. Therefore, in this case, we don't see how society is able to come up and counter all these insidious values that this mainstream media is inculcating in us. Last of all, if they can challenge it, we think that's great. But then that isn't really the kind of then that really goes back to counter-culture media, which we're talking about, and which we don't regret in today's society, and we encourage. We don't want our media today to be filled with mainstream media. Last of all, what are the impacts? Which is the constructive material which we brought up in all three speakers of our case. First of all, we told you that it entrenches gender stereotypes because it prevents male and females from going past and surpassing the gender stereotypes that are now being placed on them. It makes it even harder for the feminist movements to continue and progress in fighting for women's rights because there's an underlying notion and stereotype that women are simply shouldn't do certain things such as fight in the front line of the military. Secondly, we told you that it robs us of our individual identity, which is a point that we constantly repeated in all three speakers, that now you are unable to defy social norms because it's simply looked down upon, it's looked at something that's unnatural. And last of all, the point of stifling artistic expression, which just dropped later in both the third and the prime speaker, that this results in all the media being something that only follows mainstream ideas of gender stereotypes. And fundamentally on our side, we want change, and we don't want all these traditional gender stereotypes to be imposed on us. We're very proud to propose.